Hello and welcome to the CNBC TV18 special. I'm Shereen Bhan, and here we are in conversation with the global directors of the US-India Business Council. They're here assessing the India opportunity and really taking forward the conversations that were left behind in June when the USIBC had a similar summit in Washington, D.C. Joining me today to understand where the US-India partnership lies in the joint statement that was issued after Prime Minister Modi and President Biden's meeting, both sides said that they were forging ahead at a newer level with trust, admiration, ambition and confidence in each other's relationship and what they bring to the table. So to understand where things currently are and what the opportunities ahead look like, joining me now is Arun Kumar, Vishwanathan and Vikram Rai. Thank you very, very much for joining us. From June in DC to October here in India, how much has changed and what has changed for even better?
So when we spoke in DC, in fact, standing outside the White House, the conversation we had, the trajectory we were on, that we've talked about, is very much going in the right direction. So I think the US-India relationship has never actually been better. The conversation has got very focused on areas where the two countries can jointly make progress and which are strategically important to both countries. And on top of that list is technology. So for instance, the initiative on critical and emerging technology has risen to the fore in the bilateral relationship. In fact, tomorrow, as you know, we have a conference that will echo those themes. And I think that's really positive for both sides. Particularly positive because India has a deep reservoir of talent in technology, which I know Vikram was talking about at an earlier session, which can play to the benefit of both countries.
You're absolutely right. One of the pillars of the partnership is, of course, ISET, which was the agreement that both countries inked in January of this year, and they hope to build on that, including, of course, the MOU as far as semiconductors are concerned. But, you know, at this point in time, we are seeing global headwinds continue to weigh on the minds of business leaders, and adding to that are geopolitical tensions, which have only exacerbated. We were dealing with Russia and Ukraine, and now we're dealing with what's happening in the Middle East. So how do you look at India with what is happening around us?
So India becomes even more important in the current geopolitical scene because global supply chains are looking for resiliency and redundancy. And there's an enormous concentration of supply coming from one country. In fact, 25% of the world's manufacturing is in China. And in an uneasy global scene, there's even more urgency to be able to diversify sources of supply, and which is a natural place would be India. And India is now getting better at manufacturing. So a lot of the manufacturing that was resident in China can start moving to India. And we're seeing examples of that. We've already seen some pretty dramatic examples of that. So I'm an optimist in terms of manufacturing becoming a bigger play in India, especially advanced manufacturing. And I can tell you from our fund, we are very focused on investing in manufacturing because we are walking the talk. So that's the consequence that I see.
I know you've invested in a drone manufacturer. What else are you looking at that's looking exciting?
A rocket company in Agnikul Cosmos, which we just announced. Again, that's deep technology coming out of India, entrepreneurs here, supported by institutions like the IIT. In the case of Agnikul, it's IIT Madras. So I think these are the ways in which India can help make an opportunity out of these global headwinds that you referred to.
Well, you know, both Agnikul and Idea Forge are young Turks, so yes. So it's great to see that you backed the community that we've supported for a long time. But Kami, you know, to address the issue of the supply chain, the sort of decoupling that was expected, but now the reorientation that is underway at this point in time, how are you seeing India benefit from these changes at this point in time?
Yeah, I think from our vantage point at FedEx, we're seeing an increasing interest in global businesses in setting up manufacturing operations in India with the idea to export from here in addition to serving the large domestic market. And we're seeing this across high-tech, electronics, aviation, and auto components and pharma. And I think the pull starts with the India market, the demand in the India market. But I think it's really about how do you build an alternative source that is, that provides that resiliency and in a way that's scalable. I think that's been a big need for global businesses to serve their enterprise needs. We're also seeing e-commerce become more relevant in the cross-border context. So while e-commerce has been exploding domestically in India, we're also seeing that the demand from small and medium enterprises to grow their businesses across borders and tap into new markets. And we did a survey at FedEx where I think close to 80% of the small and medium businesses that we talked to said that cross-border e-commerce is going to be a big part of their growth strategies. The regulatory environment needs to be conducive for that to really take off. But I think those are the two drivers that we are seeing at this point. And I think that also bodes really well for India-US trade. Because a lot of the global businesses are US-based and are looking to source from India. And I think the Indian government's goal of $2 trillion in exports, both services and merchandise by 2030 is very real. And I think from a merchandise point of view, that's doubling India's share of global exports from today's share.
Absolutely.
So it's a pretty significant
It is.
lift.
And speaking of doubling, we've seen a doubling of Indo-US trade over the last 9 years. So now in excess of $190 billion. And the expectation is that we will see that grow significantly. But, Kami, you talked about some of the regulatory challenges that need to be addressed in order for this to really be able to accelerate further. You talked about manufacturing of high-tech equipment. Mobile phones is a classic example. You've now got the iPhone being manufactured here in India. What do you see as the pain points there, for instance? Just today, the US, China, and a few other countries have taken India to the WTO on this issue of import regulations or import curbs that have been brought in. What do you see as being the regulatory challenges that could hamper the growth of this story?
Yeah, I think there are two critical factors to set up manufacturing operations and export operations at scale in India. One is the availability of skilled talent, and the other is the logistics infrastructure. So the logistics cost as a percentage of GDP in India has been 13 to 14%, and the government is trying to bring that down to the high single digits. Yeah. And so the actions and the programs that have been launched around the Gati Shakti and the National Logistics Policy, I think, are very progressive. The Gati Shakti is about creating logistics infrastructure, multimodal, which will help reduce costs and increase efficiencies. The National Logistics Policy is more about, I think, the multi-jurisdictional framework, so you simplify clearances and so on. And that combined with digitization with the ULIP platform, I think makes it more standardized and reliable. So I think there is more to do in accelerating the work around these programs. And we're actively engaging with the government on what are some of the steps that could be taken. Some of the areas I think are around so customs clearance, for example, so facilitating trade in and out of India in terms of removing value restrictions on exports, express exports and courier exports and the types of commodities that classify under express and those sort of things and providing that single window clearance. I think the other area is airport infrastructure, where right now many of our airports are congested from a cargo point of view. And I think the government's looking at various options to expand and provide a dedicated infrastructure for express operations. And I think the third piece is if India is to become a cargo hub, I think the transshipment regulations will need to be eased. So that once, both in terms of aircraft-to-aircraft transfers and interline transfers and so forth, it becomes efficient. And so we're not only looking at India as a destination, but also as a regional hub.
Yeah, and that is the aspiration of the government as well. And, you've given us some very specific, tangible measures that need to be looked into for that to become a reality. But Vikram, let's talk about the big opportunity that we are seeing in the civil aviation space. As part of the Prime Minister's visit to DC was the big announcement on Boeing's front, where India will, of course, Air India will be sourcing about 200 aircraft from Boeing, which will result in creating jobs at Boeing's facilities in the US. And of course, GE has many, MOUs with HAL, for instance, on the defense side. But how are you seeing the commercial opportunity, the Indian aviation market growing very rapidly?
Unprecedented growth in Indian civil aviation. And I'll give you an example. Typically, July to September, if you look at the history of Indian Airlines, that's the most month where passenger traffic drop and airlines post losses. Across airlines, they've posted profit in July, September. So that's a big tick mark that the traffic is growing consistently, rapidly. And I'll give you some of the statistics, right? India has a middle-class population of close to 300 million. The entire population of US is 300 million. US has about close to 6,000 commercial aircraft. India has about 700 aircrafts only, growing to about 1,200 on order.
Yeah.
So, Indian middle-class population is likely to go to 440 million, so you can judge how much growth will be there on the, on the number of airplanes required. Similarly, your tier 2, tier 3 city expansions, the amount of regional jets, the amount of narrow-body jets that will grow. So that's one part of the growth. The second part of the growth, as we see, is your international traffic is likely to go from 75 million right now to about 125, 130 million to the end of the decade. For a population of 1.4 billion people, we have only 50 wide-body aircrafts. So your next area of growth will be wide-body planes. I mean, Air India has some on order, I think around 70 on order.
Yeah.
But, and the current fleet, which is running right now, is likely to retire over the next 6-7 years. So there'll be replacements plus further orders. Indians spent last year about $10 billion traveling abroad, highest ever. So if you amalgate the opportunities in civil aerospace, you'll have narrow-body jets, you'll have regional jets, and a lot of wide-body jets. So your next phase of growth will be driven by wide-body jets. So as GE, we are invested into India. I mean, we have the research center out of Bangalore, where we have close to about 1,000 engineers researching on next-generation aviation technologies. The current jets that we are flying incorporate some of the technology from this center. The next-generation engines that will come in will have some of the inputs from the technology center. We have a Pune multimodal facility where we do a lot of jet engine parts. We've got joint ventures with Tata where we do aero engine parts. So that's growing. And as you mentioned, the joint venture with HAL, where we will be manufacturing the 414 engine. Yeah. So all in all, I think invested into India, very excited about the growth prospects, both in civil aero and defense.
There's tremendous opportunity for growth, and you gave us a whole list of reasons why you believe that to be the case. But some of the challenges, like Kami was pointing out, is there at least now a growing confidence that at least on the IBC front, with the changes that have been brought in, which could have been a concern, potential concern for lessors, have those been eased on the back of the changes that have just been announced?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very valid point. I think that really addresses the concerns of the lessors and kind of brings back that confidence that India is a safe place to put your assets. So I think that's a welcome step. In terms of challenges, I think, as Kamini pointed out, is the infrastructure, right? Government is doing a fantastic job. We've doubled the number of airports over the last 7-8 years. But the amount of aircrafts that are coming in, the parking space, the landing slots, how are we going to address that? I think we have to really keep up this pace of infrastructure over the next decade to cater for the growth. So to me, keeping up the pace on infrastructure will be a very big challenge.
Welcome back. You're watching a special edition of the Global Dialogue. We're in conversation with the directors of the US-India Business Council on the opportunities that exist for both sides. You talked about some of the areas that excite you in India today, and that's where you're putting your money, quite literally. Take me through what is looking good in the portfolio today. What would you like to diversify into outside of the two examples that you shared with us?
So in our portfolio, there are really three major areas. One is what we call deep technology, including manufacturing. And I shared one example, IdeaForge, Agnikul would fall in that category. Second is tech-enabled transformation. This is a very exciting area in India, applying IoT to transform vertical sectors. So it's a very interesting company. We've invested named Stellapse, which applies IoT to milk production. And then they've actually gone into the whole supply chain of procuring milk, monitoring its quality, delivering it to customers. So this is an amazing way in which that whole traditional process is being transformed by technology. And they're doing extremely well. They're like 43,000 villages or so procuring milk. There's another interesting company that we've invested in called Brick and Bolt, which makes houses. And they will deliver a house to you from start to finish in 8 to 10 months. And as the middle class grows, and as infrastructure grows, and there are more highways that take you easily out of cities, people will want independent houses. And that's another good example of technology being applied to a very traditional business, namely home building. The third area is really applying technology to healthcare. And a great example there is a company called 5C Network, which applies AI to radiology. So it brings advanced diagnosis to, it makes advanced diagnosis available across the country by applying technology to all kinds of radiology. And so on. Another example is Connect and Heal, providing healthcare to literally hundreds of thousands of people. Again, technology plays an underlying role in all of these. So India is just full of opportunity to apply technology, both to design technology for global use and also to apply technology to vast sectors in the country.
A potential area of partnership for India and the US, and I think both leaders spoke about this when President Biden was here for the G20. India, of course, is chairing the Global Alliance for AI as well, is putting together a regulatory framework. The G20 is attempting to do that as far as cryptocurrency is concerned, but perhaps also putting together a regulatory framework for AI. Do you believe that that is an area of potential partnership and collaboration?
I think so. I think definitely having some guidelines, because there are serious fears that people around the world have on the unregulated growth of AI. So having enabling guidelines rather than restrictive guidelines is really important. I think certainly the US and India should collaborate on creating those enabling guidelines.
So Kami, what is it finally going to mean in terms of future investments into India? Given the fact that this is the big bet that each one of you is making from a FedEx perspective, what can we expect over the next few years in terms of building out the network?
Yeah, so I think, you were asking what is exciting about India. And I think for us, it's, of course, the opportunity we talked about in terms of the growth in manufacturing and exports, and the fact that there is, significant GDP growth expected over the next few years, relative macroeconomic stability, and a government that's trade-friendly, forging bilaterals with other countries, and even with the US, there are pockets of cooperation on the trade front and so forth, and also the push towards the production-linked incentive scheme, and so I think there is a strong growth orientation. But in addition to that, I think for us, what is exciting is the innovation ecosystem. So we recently launched what we call FedEx Innovation Lab, where we invest in early-stage startups with the idea that we will engage with them on their technologies and business models and see how we can bring our global scale network and customer base to scale up and potentially transform what we are doing as well. So driving corporate innovation from India. And I think the third thing I would say is leveraging India talent for the enterprise. So we recently announced that we are setting up a advanced capability community in Hyderabad. And that team, as well as other teams that we are now considering to set up in other parts of the country as well, will support multiple enterprise functions for FedEx. And I think how these three interweave and play into each other is where the real excitement is, because to succeed in the India market, we believe we need to innovate and offer a differentiated value proposition. And in order to innovate, we want to use and leverage India talent. And that's something which we can scale beyond India as we prove out the proposition in India. And I think that's really the opportunity that excites us.
And I think that's an opportunity that many companies, not just FedEx, but many companies, global GCCs in India, working on IP, working on innovation, working on R&D, that's actually been a big part of the story that we've seen building out over the last few years. From a talent perspective, from a sourcing perspective, from an export, as well as a Make in India, for India perspective, leave me with some numbers on what we should look forward to.
So, I mean, as I said, we've got about 1,000 engineers in our Jack Welch Technology Center. We'll keep on strengthening that. We have about 13 suppliers in India for whom sourcing, and that's grown about 20 times in the last 4 to 5 years. In terms of our engines, probably we are delivering approximately 3 aircrafts per week, which will be powered by GE or its joint venture over the next 9 to 10 years. So, as I said, we'll keep
3 aircraft per week from India?
No, to India.
To India, okay.
To India. To India will be delivered, which will be powered by GE or its joint ventures, CFM. So that will happen over the next 9 to 10 years. And as I said, we'll keep on strengthening the ecosystem, our research center, our sourcing, and our joint ventures with Tata. So that's
more joint ventures on the anvil?
I can't commit right now, so.
Okay. Well, we've talked about the India opportunity, but let me end by asking each one of you about the US opportunity that Indian companies, Indian entrepreneurs should be looking at, and especially in the context of the Biden administration's Inflation Reduction Act as well. What are the possible opportunities that Indian entrepreneurs should be looking at? I'll start with you.
Well, technology is clearly one.
Yeah.
There's tremendous amount of technology talent in the country, and many of those solutions and products will have global applications. So the US is a very natural country to go to. And we have an example again, so I'm not talking theoretically. There's a company called Pixis, which you might be aware of. You've seen them actually in Silicon Valley, I think. So it started here in Bangalore. It's really generative AI. They were probably doing under $10 million of revenues working just in India. By going there, they've grown manifold. That's a good example of great technology born here, taken there, and taken global. So I see many such examples in the pipeline.
Absolutely, and we're seeing a deepening of the India-US startup corridor as well. Kami, the one opportunity that Indian entrepreneurs, Indian businesses should look at?
I think smarter supply chains. So providing visibility using data and technology that will enable prediction of where things could go wrong and help intervention ahead of time. Provide insights around carbon emissions so that we move more towards green supply chains. I think those are some of the opportunities, and some of the startups that we are engaging with are really building for the world. They're born in India, but they're building for the world. So their DNA is global to start with. And I think that's where I think the big opportunity lies.
Vikram?
Air taxis.
Air taxis.
Yeah, I think
that's the way to go.
That's the way to go. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we look forward to that being a reality as well. But thank you very much, Vikram, Kami, and Arun, for joining us here as part of this special conversation. There's plenty of headroom for growth in the areas that we've talked about here, especially in areas of technology where both sides have committed to deepening and strengthening the partnership as we move forward. But for this evening, we leave you with plenty of food for thought from all of us here on the USIBC Seizing India Opportunity Moment. Thanks very much for watching. We'll take a quick break and return with the news on CNBC TV18.